Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who gives new meaning to the words helicopter parent.
Tim Longo. Wow, I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that one.
Yeah, I figured you didn't know where I was going to go with that one. I probably need to fill in why that's appropriate this week.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, the funny thing is with that particular one, it's so clever. It works on so many levels because
yes,
we're definitely helicopter parents as well. Yeah, so apologize for missing last week. We don't miss episodes very often, but we have missed half a dozen or so. But yeah, I had a health scare that I'm giggling about because it ended up to be fine. I'm perfectly fine and healthy, and it was sort of a bit of a false alarm, but it was scary in the moment for me. It did include ultimately 3 ambulances and a helicopter because we live on an island in Puget Sound, so. It was to a point where the paramedics just wanted to be better safe than sorry, and so my symptoms were bad enough to where they thought it could have been something serious enough to need surgery, quick surgery. So it involved a CAT scan and things like that. So they basically life flighted me from the island to Seattle to the hospital there in the ER, and literally. I just felt like there was an army of people swarming around me the whole night. And this all happened within like an hour or an hour and a half. It was after you could say the podcast was the cause.
It was the last thing
you did. It was the last thing I did. I was starting to get a headache at that point, and then Jen got home, and so before I knew it, I was in a helicopter. I was fairly out of it and like not fully myself, but I did have the wherewithal in the helicopter to turn to the right and look out the window, and I saw the Space Needle from the helicopter. So that made it all worth it.
The heck of a view.
The once in a lifetime, but the worst way to do it. So yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for all the kind words.
If I had known, like I could have sent you a birthday gift to get a ride, from somewhere.
Yeah.
On the land or something. I don't know. They probably don't go that close to the Space Needle, but
much easier way to get the view. That was just my ploy.
Hot air balloon next time.
No, when the paramedics were saying like, well, I think we're going to have to put you on a helicopter, I was like, what? But I'm good. Thanks. Just want to clear that up for everybody. I'm back though, and I'm feeling good. Recovery time was long as well, and it took me a little while, but I'm back. So let's finish this thing. What are we talking about?
Let's finish this thing. What are we talking about? We're talking about Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. It's I literally just came from finishing it, so we're gonna talk a bit about the boss, but we wanted to start, which actually ties into the boss a little bit, about how much more in this second or this last quarter or last act of this game, they really start to lean into the spells more as different lock and key type things. There's a number of different places. I mean, we had one that I mentioned that I got a little stuck on maybe a couple episodes ago, where I had to teleport a body out of a way. Like I didn't realize that I could send the trapper through some hole in the wall or something like that. If you remember. That might have been the first puzzle of that nature.
It was Critical Path.
And it was Critical Path, right? And I was kind of surprised to see so much more of it here, especially as how it ties into like the overall, how the game, kind of comes to a conclusion as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was too. I mean, often, not only that, but related to the spells, the sort of polarity or damage type wheel became also important in many of those lock and key situations with the spells, because you often needed to use the right, dominant color on the certain, say it's a shield or something that you needed to dispel. So you had to use the right color. So you needed to know that wheel. And the reason I bring that up is often in games with damage type, style mechanics or systems, or both, they tend to be something that augments or mutates, the sort of your success, meaning like you do double damage, or you get an extra effect, but very seldom is it literally a binary key, and so learning that wheel, the little trick you told me last week helped me remember that, by the way. So thank you to whatever viewer.
That was Brian Taylor. So thanks, Brian.
Yeah, so that was I was like, every time I came upon that, I was like, okay, I got to remember the thing again. So that was helpful without having to pull it up. But yeah, there were multiple times when you had to literally know what order the wheel went in to move forward. So
I kept remembering that, because I was doing blue, I just had to remember that green was the one that I needed for blue.
Yeah.
So I didn't always have to remember the whole thing. Though it was helpful. It was a helpful mnemonic for me, but it was, most of the time it's just like, okay, I need to do the green thing.
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, yeah, all of my quick spells were red because I needed those, for green. But there was occasionally ones you needed that were outside of, your main antagonist.
Right.
But anyway, yeah,
I was also kind of surprised how they, I didn't expect the personification. There's a lot of this at the end of this game that I did not remember well. I remember more of the insanity effects and things like that than I particularly remembered how this wound down. And the reason I bring that up is because there's a point at which you see these three. Oh, and you may not have found this room because you got the Gladius. Yeah, so you saw this room with the three portraits of the scholar, the sorcerer, and the warrior.
Yep.
And I was very surprised by that because I had been thinking so much about the different colors being more about the I don't know, the eternal beings from beyond or whatever, than about anything human. That I was so surprised to see a personification of humans, right? And as being embodying the characteristics of these colors. I totally tracked. I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. I just was I hadn't thought about it in those terms at all. Like I'd never thought of it as having anything to do with humanity and only being something about the beyond.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great point because I feel like maybe part of the reason that I didn't remember the details of the game that well is what I remember taking away the most, not to jump to takeaways too early, but is that they, again, more than a lot of games it's not a fear thing, but sometimes you're afraid to commit to a concept like that so wholly because you want to give the player some wiggle room to kind of, find different ways to achieve a goal, but they commit to it to that personification you're talking about so fully in many, many ways. The only reason when I got to that room that I wasn't super surprised is for whatever reason, I went to the rune page and, you can quote unquote check every rune and it has a description. And if you read the description for the main colored runes, they talk about each of those.
Durga and
Zelotov
or whatever,
and the U one, yeah. But it says like in the red one, it says warrior, literally in the description. And so I was like, oh, those correspond to the description. I didn't really know or kind of and as we talked about in the past, each of those correspond to one of the main resources you have in the game too, right? So it's just very tightly wound design, which I really have always appreciated. And that was the lasting memory for me of the game was really the color, not the ordering of the circle, but just that there was a relationship and that each one had its own kind of shtick,
Yeah. Yeah. And they're just opposed for all time or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's also interesting that you know, you think of those three archetypes and they also are kind of opposed. You know, they have very different views of the world, right? The warrior, the scholar, and the sorcerer are just very different sorts of people. Like, that's why they're archetypes, right? So it's just interesting, and maybe a comment about humanity and the elder gods tied together a little bit in that way, like that there's some kind of kinship there in how we oppose one another because our viewpoints are different. I don't know. Maybe not entirely. I might be reaching there, but
well, no.
But I mean, it's, you know, you can kind of believe it based on how tightly wound all of this has been.
Well, yeah. I mean, and we kind of alluded to that point. We kind of alluded to this in the first episode and why we've stayed a bit vague with the Lovecraftian references specifically. You know, a lot of his criticism came from his representation of some of his fictional characters and creatures in the form of the quote unquote other, you know, and him grafting that onto something in real life. And to your point, you know, it's like if he was trying to personify certain fictional races as other races, that's not cool, you know? And so I think for that to even accidentally bleed into this game because they were borrowing from that stuff is it's not out of the realm of possibility for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they do that. I think they just kind of, I mean, one of the things with not actually using Lovecraft specifically is that they just can avoid all of that.
Oh yeah. No, I don't mean
they don't have to have those associations.
Yeah, right.
Even if they are, you know, they're in Rhode Island. Like, I mean, they obviously want you to think about that. They're kind of walking kind of a tightrope there. So they definitely want to say, oh, hey, this is, you know, Lovecraftian. But yeah, I don't know. I mean,
well, no, I didn't mean that they were doing the same thing he was doing with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just meant that the metaphor might still be there. You know what I mean? Just from a sense of, I mean, it's sort of like the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse or the Seven Deadly Sins or whatever. You know, it's like there's always going to be a wrath-based something, right? Like the warrior, there's always going to be, and those are always going to naturally oppose. And personality traits in psychology are similar, right? So yeah. It's interesting. And, you know, the one thing that I'll regret, because I know I'm not going to do it, but as I always do in the podcast, I'll say that I want to, and maybe will someday, even though I won't. The whole thing about the fourth god or ancient is something I'm very interested in knowing more about, you know, but I'll never get there, you know, I don't even think I'll watch YouTube, you know, versions of it. But to your point about like how they all relate, and then I think it's Mantarok, right? He's the purple.
Yeah, it's Mantarok is the corpse god or whatever. Yeah.
And I think they refer to him at some point somewhere of the one that maintains balance between the three. So I'm just curious to know if they get into that more when you play the fourth time with his, you know, polarity, or not polarity, but
I mean, it's really a lack of polarity in his case, right? He has no weakness.
Yeah. So he must be super powerful in that playthrough or something.
I guess. I don't really know. I mean, I am super curious, and, you know, I am the person who might actually do it.
I know, if anyone's going to do it.
They were asking when I finished tonight. They were like, so tomorrow night we're going to go and start over? I was like, ooh, I don't know about tomorrow night, but maybe soon.
Yeah, if anyone's going to do it, you could do it. So report back in. It's a small little thing, and I don't know if it's actually intentional or not, but and we'll pause on getting into detail on the final boss battle, but Pious uses a spell. If you have shields on, he uses a spell in the final battle that dispels your shields, and it's purple.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I was wondering if maybe like that's a foreshadowing of a spell you might get. I guess he's just dispelling. It's probably just dispelling.
Yeah, I think it's just dispelling, but it's dispelling anything you might put on yourself.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. So, it's the whole spell. Oh, and going back to sort of your original first point about the testing of the player. The thing that I really appreciated about this last section, especially in the ancient city, the repetition aside for a second, is that sort of testing of the player and the character. There's really good connection between you and Alex, right? From a just sort of that dissonance that you usually feel of having the player agency being messed up, right? From the character and the player having different motivations and different knowledge and stuff. But you and Alex are learning together as you're going through the book. And so you have as much information as she does. And then also you're learning sort of these spells and stuff. And so there's this feeling by the end when you're in the city, especially, and you're kind of going back and forth through the doors and the rooms, that you've gained all these keys that you need. And it's like the ancient ones are testing you, as a player and as Alex. And so can you get through this room? Can you get through that room? Can you get through? And so I really appreciated having that all coalesce by the end, and feeling like, and Pious even says it at the end, it's taken him 2,000 years to get to this point. And then Alex responds saying, during that 2,000 years, all of these people have been working together to stop you. And it's culminating in this time, right? And it felt like that to me. It felt like what she was saying, it felt like that really happened. And I think that's a really big success.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and yeah, I mean, I think this is a game that sort of is, like you said, testing you to see basically if you've been paying attention. There's even the spot afterwards where, and to be fair, I had to look it up, where I guess the uncle was like, no, come, we've got to set the last rune, right? This is after the boss fight, and you can't look at your notes, or I mean, you can't. If you have notes, you can look at. But you can't look at anything in game in the interface. To figure out which rune you should set in there. It's all, of course, because you have to bind, I guess, the creature that you had summoned to help. Basically, you have to then rebind that creature, and you have to change this. Change this one rune in one tower so that you can now, bind that creature instead.
Right.
And I mean, I wasn't paying attention, and the internet wasn't. I guess for games, it was probably like there was probably already game facts and stuff like this at the time, but wasn't as common that you would be looking things up on the internet. I think for games quite yet, maybe it's kind of on the cusp of that, I think. But strategy guides are still happening. You probably didn't see this happen, but I messed that up. I didn't remember which one they wanted, and there is he does sort of respond and say, "Oh no, not that one." Oh, okay. Yeah, so they have a failsafe there, thank goodness. If that had failed, I did have a moment where I was like, if this fails and I have to play that boss battle over again. That's why I looked it up, because I did not. I mean, I really loved the boss battle, but I was trying to get up here so we can record a podcast.
Yeah. No, luckily he actually has some funny little quips there where he says like, "Oh no, you know better than this, Edward. You studied this stuff. It's not that one." Basically, I think you can just trial and error through it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Yeah. I'm glad for that then. Yeah, that's good. I was just like not, especially thinking this could make me have to go back. But it's good to have that moment anyway, oh my God, am I going to have to do this again? If I get it wrong? I mean, that's, it feels momentous. Feels less momentous if you do fail and it's like, try again. Yeah. But that's also fine. It's also fine. I don't mind stuff like that. It's like it does remind me a little bit of Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, and if you would die, to have him say, "Oh no, that's not how it happened," and reload, from your last whatever. So I like those sorts of things. I like soft failures, but if they don't fail, it's even better. So it is a small point that I did have in my notes on that. There's a couple times when, and it's. In a couple of the times that I'm talking about are specifically with the towers, where I think if you read between the lines and you really are paying attention, what spell you're supposed to cast on those towers.
And this is the best. There's another example I can't think of right now, but the towers are the example to make the point. And then Edward's little moment at the end is another example of what I'm about to say. There's still two, and this is a bit of the era of design, I will admit. It's not just this game that does this, but it's a little bit too trial and error in figuring out what is the right thing, because if you're paying attention, so the first spell you cast is the one that basically wipes out the city, right? As Edward.
That's dispel magic, I believe.
Yeah, it's the dispel magic. So when I got to give you an example of what I'm talking about, when I got to that tower, for whatever reason, I had my brain thinking about, I guess, kind of Alex's story for some reason. So it was my fault ultimately as the player, but they didn't really hold your hand on that. They didn't really say like, you must, or maybe they did and I missed it, but you know that you must remove the magic from the city or something. So the first thing I cast was summon creature, because I thought it was time to summon the enemy creature. You know, that was what I had in my head.
And you didn't expect you to be coming back too, right?
No, and I couldn't remember. Yeah, I couldn't remember if Edward tries to summon in the story and then he fails, and that's why Alex has to do it, or what. So they have a fail-safe there too, where, you know, if you put the wrong runes in, you know, it just tells you, oh, that's the wrong one, go back and try again. So you don't fail, luckily. But it does mean you have to go travel back to that tower. So It does waste time, which this game isn't always respectful of your time. So it's cool that probably if I really put the breadcrumbs together, I would have thought to myself, I use dispel magic there. But that's an example of sometimes they've hidden the answers to some of the stuff that they want you to do a little too hard. And I just think they could have done a better job in some of those cases of really like letting you know what you're supposed to be doing. Because then when you do get to Alex, it is summon, right? That's when you do use the summon one.
Yeah, that's when you have to do summon. Yeah, summon the creature.
But then in Edwards, in the very final one you're talking about, it's the protect symbol, which is like, right. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's the protect because you still have the creature set, right? So it's protect creature, which means you put it inside something, right, to protect it.
Yeah, I get it. But, you know, I guess my point is when you get to that moment, if you don't have a guide and you're sitting there in 2002 and you're like, because, you know, the other concepts they're not completely abstract, but like one of them is project, you know, and one of them, you know, so it's like these verbs that, I don't know, there's just enough wiggle room where I think I can see a lot of people getting to that point and being confused about which one to use.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, no argument that it could be confusing. You know, I think it's one of those cases where there's a usability versus fiction fight, and they maybe go a little too far towards the fiction, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, like we've talked about where we don't really fully understand these runes, and maybe they mean something a little bit more complex than what we understand them to be. You know, and we're not able to make interesting sentences because we can't really figure out the grammar or whatever. You know, are nice narrative lenses for what the magic system does. But if you lean too far into that, you get to a point of like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, you know?
Yeah.
So that's going too far.
Yeah. I
definitely see that point.
Getting into the designer's head problem that we've talked about from time to time. Yeah. All that being said,
that's a real thing, right? I mean, that's a real issue of like, oh no, I need you to do exactly what, you know, I had in mind here. But I'm not going to give you strong cluing. I've been seeping in this stuff for years, and you've got to kind of figure it out over the course of, you know, a dozen hours or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, it's a definite issue.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, do you want to? One thing we wanted to hit that I wanted to ask you about to take a step back, because our last episode, if you recall, I did not finish all of the levels that we needed to. That I needed to. So what that means is one of the only boss battles in the game is at the end of the World War I chapel section.
Right.
Peter, is that his name, I think?
Yes, Peter.
And so the reason I wanted to bring that one up And this actually will go back to the spell system, and we'll probably be referring to the spell system this whole episode, to be honest. But at the end of that, you do have a boss battle with the Guardian, but it's based on the ancient that you chose. So each of the two of us will have different bosses. So I wanted to ask you what it was like. How was it for you? Was it difficult? And then I wanted to talk about my experience with mine and sort of some of the decisions that I think are very 2002 boss design decisions in my case. That were really a bummer. But so what was you chose?
So I was blue, and I had this 3-legged creature that's quite tall, a couple stories tall or whatever. Yeah, kind of a cool monster design. It worked pretty well within its budget and everything like that. And basically it would summon creatures, zombies and things that would damage my magic, which made it hard to beat, because I needed that magic to do magic attack spells to it. There's one spell, which is magical attack. So the key was there was a time when you had to cast the spell because it was in kind of this state where it was vulnerable, I guess, to the attack. But you had the zombies to deal with. So you're kind of like trying to balance getting rid of the zombies quickly enough, which often meant kind of moving around a bit. The part that made it particularly tough is that if you get too close to it, you can no longer see the whole thing, and therefore it can't be the target of the spell, but it doesn't communicate that well at all. So it's not clear why it's not working. So I figured, well, I can run around to the back of it. There's a spot in the back where there's kind of a space where it can, because it can stomp you while you're moving around. And I thought, well, I can get to there. It can't stomp me there, but I'm close enough. I should be able to target with the magic. Not so, because you needed to be able to see basically its whole body or something like that. I was lucky. I had somebody in the stream telling me, or just kind of cluing me into that I was doing something that was making me unable to target it. Not just telling me don't do that, but more kind of like making me think about it. But yeah, at first I thought it was just a timing thing, and then I would get the timing right. And I was like, oh, that's really weird. Seems like I'm doing the same timing and it's not happening. So yeah, it was a little bit tricky. I think there is some stuff that they do to try to clue you in of where you should be, but it's not clear. Like there's this wall that keeps moving in, this magical barrier that's pushing in closer, which to me, it's possible to read that as you want to be near the barrier, and that the moving the barrier in makes it tougher, but you still want to be near the barrier, right? So I don't think that that's well communicated, but I think that might be part of the intent, is like, oh, we're going to tighten up the barrier, but you still have to be out near that. There's just not as much of it, right? So I don't know, as much ground. What was your experience, and what was your critter like?
So it's very interesting to hear you describe it, because there definitely are some mechanical similarities. There's a barrier as well. There is a repercussion to getting too close to the enemy. So my boss is this tall, kind of skeletal, gangly, multi-armed biped type creature that's just hovering. And it has no head, but it has the rune in the place of the head, which is similar to the jumping ones.
Yeah, similar to mine. There was a rune.
Okay, So it's just hovering there and casting magic. And so there's a couple phases. The first phase, it's just kind of shooting a magic at you that kind of mind controls you if you're far away. So you have to kind of shake free of it, like when you get when you're grabbed by a zombie. So it's like mind controlling you. And I don't think that does damage, or if it did, I had shield on. And then similar to you, there's a state that it gets in where it's flashing, kind of recharging. And this is the only thing I looked up in the whole game, because I was stuck on this boss for a long time. I didn't know that during that flashing it was the only time you could do damage to it. Right. And so, I had to use the magic attack spell, which is I don't think I didn't need to target it. I just needed to be close enough for that to, because the magic attack is like an area effect. So I just need to be close enough for it to get hit. But the problem was the amount of time that it charges is only slightly more than the amount of time it takes to cast that spell. So
now, were you doing a 7-point spell?
I was, yeah.
Yeah, so you can do a 5-point spell.
Oh, okay. Well, that was I just assumed because you just get the power wheel right before this.
I also had a hint for that
too.
So
yeah.
I mean, I actually was able to use the 7 for the first phase to get it, because the timing, I don't know. I might have just nailed the timing and just.
I mean, I did it. I did it with the 7 phase the whole time. I mean, it was just very, very tricky, because I would have to make sure no zombies were going to interrupt me, because it also had a phase of summoning zombies. And then I had to get it into that state, which was I kind of eventually learned the rhythm of that, because it wasn't a consistent pattern. It was a very scripting heavy boss, I think. And so that actually creates some problems when it's that scripting heavy, because it's not as reliable. But anyway, so then I had to start casting before it went into the state. So it ended, you know what I mean? Like at the right time while it was still in that state. So very frustrating. And after the fact, I did think about I wonder if I could use lesser powerful spells, but I'm fighting the boss. Like this culmination, it makes all the sense in the world to me to use the 7. So, but I thought about that afterwards, unfortunately. So that was a pain. Yeah. So, and you couldn't get close because it would just do this pounding attack on top of you. So yeah, the main thing was the timing. I just couldn't believe that the timing of the vulnerability window was almost the exact same time of the spell, because it was like, seriously, that is really unfair.
Yeah, no, I felt the same way when I was having trouble with it. And then I think somebody suggested, hey, because I don't always say, or people aren't always there when I start or whatever, I don't always say, hey, no hints, people ask, is this blind or, whatever, or no, and I have sometimes put in the title, like no hints or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't always remember. So in this case, somebody, I often have, it's kind of funny, people who play these games a lot, who like to speed run them or just are big fans. I had somebody who's like, oh yeah, I play this every year. I'm playing it now, recently.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, cool. But they often are sharing their joy in the game and their experience and whatnot with you to make it a little easier for you. So it's not a bad thing. It's just I often forget.
Yeah. No, and I
try to preserve the experience of like, as close as I can make it to playing it for the first time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it seemed fun to do it that way. And like I said, I looked that up anyway. I don't know, to be honest, like I had pounded my head against that. So, because the the vulnerability state is not very clear. And it's very similar to other states that my boss was in. So if I hadn't looked that up, I don't know if it ever would have dawned on me that was a state at all, that I should do something, especially because of the timing element that I was talking about. Like, I think I would have convinced myself that the timing was so close that couldn't be it. They would never do that, but
exactly.
They definitely.
Yeah, no, and I think it's one of those things where, in hindsight, you're like, oh, okay, that's actually, a sort of interesting design choice, right? To not go to the full power and all those sorts of things. But that's kind of, I don't know, intellectual. In the moment, you kind of, you have these sort of instincts that they're directly playing against. Especially with the timing, and having literally just gotten that, new circle of for magic.
Yeah.
It's weird choices to then make the more effective strategy to be dropped down to 5. Of course, people are also telling me how I could get by it without fighting it at all. Because apparently,
seriously,
there are ways to cheese it. Yeah.
Oh, how funny.
There's a way, I think you can summon a zombie, I think was the thing. If you got out back there and you summoned a zombie, you were now in like a magic shield thing, and it would because you're shielded while the zombie is out, and it would push you into the room where the artifact or whatever you're trying to get is, and you could just skip ahead to the cutscene.
You just pick it up?
Yeah, it just knocks you into
triggers.
It pushes you through. Yeah,
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, and I think maybe as a bit of a segue, if we're closing down that boss.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I do remember my first playthrough, I pretty much fell back on the same spells that I used this time. And I wanted to ask you if you had used any other go-to, because by the end you get like the magic pool and the bind, and the summons I only used for critical path moments anyway. And I did figure out, by the way, why I was having trouble with summons earlier. Because of the way I played the game with an empty insanity meter. The insanity is actually your timer for how long you can have the summoned creature out.
Oh.
So because I never had any insanity at all, never any sanity rather, I would summon, a trapper or something, and then it would almost instantly just, I'd lose control of it. So it's sort of like, which is kind of a cool, again, pretty tight design, because it makes a lot of sense to me that when you summon a creature, your sanity is being drained.
Yeah.
For holding control of it, because
Yeah.
it makes sense. And then when you run out, then you'll lose control of it.
Yep.
So
and didn't pick up on it.
Yeah, well, because you probably had enough, right? And it's very slow.
I only did it the one time, or whatever, like only when it was required.
There was there was at least one other time.
There was one other time where you had to do it, but it just was like, I just didn't really do that. You had to do it. There's a three summon puzzle in one room when you're at the end of the game. You have to summon 3 different creatures and return them to the cages that they were in, or whatever. That's basically it. I guess
there's that one. I think to get the sword, which is optional, right? There's that one place where there's that wall. You had to do that, right? Where it's like a.
Oh yeah, you have to summon a trapper to move the obsidian.
The
stone or whatever. Yeah.
Stone thing. By the way, did you notice that those things the body and that stone thing show up in the trapper world?
The trapper world, yes, it's pretty
brilliant
great.
Little touch. Yeah,
it's a really nice little touch. Yeah.
Anyway, so that. But as far as the spells that I ended up using, I just used shield. I used magic attack sometimes, and then I used recover. And that was kind of it.
At the end of the game, I just used magic pool, shield, and occasionally enchant item. I often enchanted my weapons in this game.
Yeah, interesting. And you noticed it was useful?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I felt like I cut through things a lot faster. I felt like it anyway. I started that enchant item I was using all the time early in the game, so that was just something I just kept doing.
Yeah.
Towards the end, I did the magic pool because I would be casting more spells, especially in that last section with Alex, where it's constantly casting shields so she can get through the yellow area, where she takes damage constantly as she moves through it. I just was like, well, I'll just put the magic on. Whenever the shield is even down, a couple, as long as I'm in a safe place, I'll immediately cast it again, because I know the magic's going to be replenishing very quickly. So I might as well just go ahead and lean into that. So,
right. Yeah. Oh, there's the other one I use that I forgot is I forget the name of it. The one that creates a magical barrier around you that you can step into. It might just be called magical barrier.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah.
But that one's really good for the horrors, the big guys, because you just stand inside while it's hitting and taking damage by hitting that barrier, and then you just whack on it. So it's a bit of almost feels like a cheese.
Yeah, I did actually use that once against a horror in the level. I forget which one. I guess it was the architect, Roberto, where I said, "Oh, I didn't have the sword." Like I had missed the sword where you pick up the sword that he uses, and I had been like, "Wow, this is really hard," to figure out how to defeat these different things, because in that room, like, you really had to deal with the horror, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to cast the spell to reveal, the invisible thing that you needed to reveal or whatever it was. You just wouldn't have time. So that was actually how I got through that without a sword.
Right.
And then later found the sword. I was like, oh, well, this would have made everything easier.
It's that magical barriers really and came in handy for me. That was one of my go-tos for sure. But I think the reason it's very interesting because the reason that I didn't use the magic or the enchant weapon very much is, I didn't use, because of my play style with, not worrying about insanity. Most of the time I'm not fighting. I'm not killing it. I'm just running past stuff because I don't, now, all that really means is I have to use recover probably more than I usually would need to, because once your insanity's empty, it starts taking out your health, right? So I'm visually seeing these things and my health is trickling down. But but other than that, I didn't really, other than when it was absolutely necessary. But yeah, it didn't dawn on me. It's a very, very weird way to play the game with empty insanity or empty sanity. So
yeah.
But it was fun.
Cool, you could do it, and it's pretty good that you could do it. So
yeah, and it's I'm sure I saw many, most of the sanity effects. Did you ever get the Hamlet one?
No, I did not. I did not.
So what happens is, do you want me to tell you, or you're gonna? Are you gonna play?
I might keep playing, but it's fine. I mean,
I don't know. It touches my heart. So it's based on, I think you go and interact with something like a door or something, and then your head will fall off. And then they'll play that, that dun dun, that the trill that they play from time to time, and then you can go and pick up your head. And once you pick it up, your head kind of floats in the middle of the screen like an object in your inventory, and then they start playing. I think it's Edward's voice. He starts doing the "to be or not to be" speech.
That's amazing.
From Hamlet, i.e., Yorick. Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him. Anyway, ratio. Yeah, exactly.
He used to strut about with me upon his back while I was a child, something like that. It's
pretty good. Sounds right.
Yeah.
So anyway, that I thought, little Shakespearean literary reference there was cool and just humorous. They definitely were having fun with those things.
Oh yeah,
so much fun.
It's the best. I mean, it really is a thing that is the thing you remember super well. And we've said how, there's a lot of details that we had kind of forgotten, and 5-10 years from now, I'm going to have forgotten it all again. But I'll still remember the insanity effects, even having seen fewer of them this time, because I kind of knew what I was doing generally. And the first time, probably less so. I'm sure there's just some sort of residual general memory of like what sorts of things I was supposed to be doing. And maybe I just grokked it better having played it once, do that. I was going to suggest we talk about the actual final boss, and maybe the touch on the city tower reuse, because that we were not fond of that. That felt like very unnecessary padding to me, having gone through it all once with the uncle and figuring out what you had to do, and then going through it all again I liked having the new puzzles. That was kind of fun, but literally having to go walk up, do the same, like it was already repetitive.
Yeah.
Like these 9 towers you had to do and then get away from, and then to have to do it all again, where half of them are just like Pargon or whatever, the power rune. More than half, right? It would have been 6 and 3. It's absurd how much time you spend walking up to a tower, seeing what the availability of the runes is, casting the rune, most of them Pargon, and then having to make your way back to the main room again. That was tedious.
Yeah, I agree.
Committing to the bit. But
it is. It's
maybe an overcommitment to the bit.
Yeah. That's the thing. Is like, I have such a inner conflict with this game because we talked about this in pre-show. So one of my notes, especially about the ending levels, I don't think there's really anything too much I want to talk about in Michael's section, but there was a sense of culmination, right? The note I wrote down is basically saying, this concept of, for each of the 4 locations, this concept of peeling layers of the onion off with each era, right? So each character, you go to Cambodia and you get a new piece of the puzzle, right? And then the mansion, and then the chapel, and then the tower in the Middle East, or what have you, or the ruins there, the ruins. And I love, from a narrative standpoint, I love this kind of concept, but then the developer in me just sees this reuse of content, and yes, that's a little cynical to feel that, they're just elongating the game. There's a lot of cleverness to it, but it's just, it's too much, Yeah. And you were mentioning that they actually cut some characters from the game, and I couldn't even imagine how many more times you're going to go to these. You could have gone to these locations if there were even more characters, but the city itself was definitely the worst one for that. But again, the inner conflict in me is that this concept of using the towers as a I don't know, batteries to multiply the effect of putting a spell over the whole city was, I thought, really cool. And felt very grand. And I actually also made a note on the camera work in that section was quite good. You get a sense of scale, and
you're way pulled back and you can see how huge this thing is.
But it just doesn't make up for the repetition, for sure.
Yeah, but again, like, at the same time, I'm like, well, I got to use all my arsenal of things. I had to reveal invisible to show that a floor was,
that was neat.
And I had to do those summons, and I had to bind two creatures to work for me so I could get through another barrier because they would kill each other off. And I mean, it's just all of that stuff I really enjoyed, but it just felt like such a slog. All the interstitial stuff, gluing it together, felt like a super slog. It's on balance. I don't think it's successful to reuse that thing. So I don't know. Yeah, over committing to the bit again, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, but, I mean,
if you're gonna reuse stuff, there's some really clever stuff here, like having a game about sort of cyclical returns to locations and things like that, and a story that can support it. I don't know how many stories support that sort of thing, but they found one, right? And that made for production benefit, and made it possible to make this with a fairly small team on a. I mean, I don't know what the budget was like, but I'm sure the budget wasn't crazy. And when you're doing something different like this, budget can't be crazy, right? You're reaching out to a pretty niche audience, to do, Lovecraftian stuff, cosmic horror or whatever. That's not the mainstream, right? That's not Star Wars or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I get it. But there's definitely times where, like, okay, we've worn the rug a little thin here, going in circles.
Yeah. Well, so what about the final boss? That's another section that you wanted to hit.
So the cyclical thing about the boss that I loved is it's basically the game in miniature. It's like all these characters have been fighting against what Pious Augustus represents, whichever god he's working for, throughout history. And then and in that, you've been Alex, being the person reading their stories, being them for a moment, right? I mean, as the player, you're being both Alex and then, coming back to her and then, embodying these other characters and their time periods. And that's basically the final fight, right? Is embody this character so you can take a stab at the thing, right? And then at the god, the icon of the god or whatever. Meanwhile, basically empowering your god to be the god that's fighting on your behalf to fight the other one. I just love how the whole game is right there in a just sort of a micro way of I'm Alex, and then I'm each of the ghosts in turn. They come out of those statues. I think you might only see one of them come out of the statue, but then that's where they're coming from. So you're tying back into that hallway where the book was. I mean, there's just so much to love. Totally unparsable in some ways what's going on there. Like I was using a walkthrough at that point, so I did not have to figure it out. I did try for a little while to not. I just was not getting what was going wrong.
You mean the pattern with the boss himself?
Well, yeah. So first you have to basically you have to do a certain amount of damage to the icon. So you hit Pious. Right. That makes the god's icon show up. You have to go hit it. I was letting my sanity get down too low. He was constantly, dismissing any shielding I would put on. So it was tough, and I was having a hard time getting past just that part. But then once the ghosts came in, it was more, okay, I've got to do the same thing, but with each of them in turn, so they could each have their sort of moment to shine and contribute to the battle. I just thought that was great. Just legitimately great to touch on all those characters again, and how it reinforces the theme is that humanity across the ages is fighting these things. I don't know. I thought it was amazing.
It was, and I will also say that as far as the writing is good pulp video game writing is what I will say.
It's good Gatorade.
it is what it is. But as far as like villains go, like they did a great. It's trust me, it's not easy to have a good villain be consistent throughout a game. And especially in this case, you don't actually get to fight him multiple times. Right. But what's even cooler is you start out as him.
Oh
you play as Pious. So the connection you feel with a villain, and then getting to fight him mano a mano at the end is even cooler. And then I actually forgot how they sort of still made it grand and cosmic by having this sort of connection between the two gods up in space. Yeah, fighting. So now it was an economical battle because it was just two humanoids, but also, like you said, you have the history there with the ghosts. But then above you get the sense that the Titans are fighting. Right. So it was just very well done in that regard. And then Pious is somebody you really want to kill. He's just a real jerk the whole time, and clearly, mad and blinded and blah, blah, blah. But, he's just done a lot of bad things to a lot of people. And because of the way the book works and the way that you are learning about the story, as Alex is learning about the story, she's coming with, even though this is the first time she's met him, she knows all about him because of the book. Right. So, the fact that she's so pissed off at the end makes sense. It's not forced. So yeah. And then mechanically, the only thing I want to mention there is I think it took me 5 tries. And I had trouble obviously in the first couple, but what I did end up doing, which I hadn't done throughout the rest of the game because I just found ways to not need to do it, is I actually quick slotted lower level recover spell. Oh, right. Yes. Because it's faster to cast. Right. So I can cast it in between his casts because I need to dodge his casts. And then the other thing is, as you recall, I'm playing with an empty sanity bar. Right. So every time he drains me, right, it's draining my health. And so I had to kind of manage that. And so I'm casting that thing all the time, but because it's so quick, because I downgraded it, I was still topped off the whole time. So it was actually pretty effective.
Yeah, I also did that, but that was on the basis of the walkthrough.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I did, yeah, and I was just trying to time it out with the 7 version throughout the first few, attempts. Tries, yeah. And it was just too much. Too
I know. I mean, he immediately banished because I think I had a shield going in or something, and he banished it, and then I couldn't get a 7 off, and I was like, uh-oh, this is going to be tough. So I would have gotten there eventually, I think, but
I also quick slotted the lower level shield too, because I wanted to replenish that, but then I realized he cast that dispel magic and said so it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah, no, I ended up doing all recovers.
Yeah,
I always just popped into the menu. I was just like I went in and just like did the multi-button presses all the time. I didn't use the quick slots really at all.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. No, I enjoyed using those. It's just fun to get into a rhythm of them, and I had a whole system to where what location they were on the.
Oh,
on the
I'm
pad.
sure you did.
Oh yeah, I got it all min-maxed. So I wanted to ask you a question though, before we move on. So I had a weird thing happen. So the first 4 attempts, when he got to phase, I guess 2, he would cast that same sort of magical barrier thing that I said I was using.
Mm-hmm.
He would cast those in certain spots, and then you had to kind of like go and dispel them. And then to get past them to the other side, which I don't know why actually you needed to do that, because he would still come walking towards you. But then on my 5th attempt, he didn't go into that phase, and I just kind of pounded on him, and then he died. Did you have any behavior changes in the boss battle?
Yeah, he did do those shields in the 3rd phase, like after all the ghosts had fought, and then I would just wait for him to come through it because he was coming through it. Yeah, I don't really understand that choice, other than if you go after him, you'll take damage, right? So, I didn't really.
Maybe he didn't get a 3rd phase. I don't know. He just after that
you just kind of wail on him.
Yeah. Okay. Then maybe
the first phase you have to do a few attacks with Alex before you get the ghosts. So that the ghosts.
Okay, that is the 3rd phase then. So he just wasn't casting the barrier.
It's really just the ghosts going back and forth. And if you lose the sanity of the if the ghosts lose the sanity meter, because they take damage, basically they basically have 1 hit maybe each. Yeah. So you have to really be very sort of quick and dash in, and Yeah. I got lucky a lot of times where he would follow me and I'd be attacking the icon and I'd also hit him, so I'd immediately transition into the next person and just have to go to the icon. So it actually ended up working pretty well a lot of the time, which was kind of weird, but I was like, oh, that kind of felt cool. I don't know how intentional that was, but I liked it, so I hope it was intentional. It felt powerful. It felt like I was smart, even though I was mostly lucky. Anyway, it was cool. It's great. A memorable boss battle that I, nonetheless hadn't remembered. So
yeah, it's memorable for lots of reasons, but if you really break it down mechanically, it's pretty simple.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's not even as elaborate as the Guardian one. So pretty interesting success in that regard.
Yep.
Yeah. Good.
All right.
Good game.
Yeah, definitely a good game. Another good horror game to play in the month of now we're into November, but to play for our Halloween scary game. Really glad to have gotten a chance to play it again. I never thought
would have been perfect if I hadn't had my own personal horror moment. We would have ended right.
You hadn't been lifted up into the sky. Monstrosity.
Yeah. No, I'm glad we revisited too. I was hoping that it would be one we'd get, and so I'm glad we did it. And if I would love to live vicariously through you. I guess we're feeling like we're closing down, but we haven't done takeaways. So
yeah, we're gonna do that. I thought we'd take a quick break because we're at an hour, and come back for takeaways and one bit of feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We're at the end of the series, so there's actually, before we even do takeaways, I just remembered, there's two things we do at the end of a series. One is we do our takeaways. The second, and I'm going to do this first, is that I give you a book recommendation to go along.
Nice. It's called The Complete Works of...
Yeah, no, it is not called that. My Brett's book recommendation this time, I had a couple to pick from. I will tell you my runner-up, which is a novella by, I believe, Victor Laval called The Ballad of Black Tom.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mentioned that because it was recommended to me from Waypoint Radio. I'm sure it was Austin Walker who pointed this one out. But it plays in some of the same space, but actually addresses the racism head on. So it's just kind of interesting from that perspective. It's not very long, so it's a pretty quick read. I liked it. I think the one that I picked though is The Night Ocean by Paul Lafarge. It's a pretty elliptical, strange kind of novel. It's pretty good length too, and it does directly deal with Lovecraft as a person and a character who knows him, and an author in the present who is researching them. It's one that has a lot of unanswered questions at the end, I think, in some ways, which I think is appropriate to the subject, and kind of playing in that area of the sort of cosmic horror, but through the human lens. I mean, it's not really a horror story. But it has some of this like returning to places, cyclical, maybe sort of obsession as well, that I think is all kind of interesting and kind of touches on some of the stuff that's in this game. So cool. That's my recommendation. I think it was Paul Lafarge's maybe fourth novel. I don't know that I've read anything else by him, but it was pretty good. Pretty good. I read that a year or two ago. Yeah. But let's turn to takeaways. You sir, I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Okay. Well, the first takeaway that I think we obviously talked a lot about and we need to definitely mention is essentially the game structure and flow. And what I mean by that is the way that they utilize the characters and the time slicing that happens and the sort of interaction with all of those characters via the book, the Tome of Eternal Darkness, and how Alex is sort of the conduit of that knowledge throughout sort of the 2,000 years or what have you. But that structure for me had always been very memorable and cleverly done. And though we were critical of the sort of reuse of areas, they did each time try to dress up those areas differently. And they did try to reveal, I think the chapel specifically is one that I really appreciate because they added new areas over time and it got bigger and bigger. And they did try to sort of reveal more and more mysteries or answer more and more mysteries over time with each of the locations. And so I just thought from a game structure perspective and the commitment to the multiple characters, and then as Brett mentioned before the break, that culmination in the boss battle and seeing all those ghost characters. Oh, and even just the mysterious room wherever, I guess we never really get to find out where that room is, with all the statues. Yeah. So you actually have a physical personification, a lot of personification happening in this game, of your journey. And then an interesting little detail I wrote down that you probably noticed too. Those statues obviously would have been put there, however they are magically put there throughout time in a chronological order. There's a couple cases in the way that the structure works in the game where you are playing as a character out of order chronologically. And if you notice in the walkway, the statue for can't remember the exact example, but the statue that that shouldn't be there isn't there based on when, because there's one time when you play a character from the future and then later you play one from the past, and so the statues are actually accurate. They took that into account. So the statues don't show up in that room chronological to how you play them, they show them that room chronological to the history. So I thought that was a nice attention to detail.
It was probably Maximilian and like, somebody earlier than him.
Yeah, I can't remember the example, but I remember thinking, wait a second, why did we skip that section? It was Roberto. That was what it was. And so when you go to that walkway as Roberto, even though you've played Paul or Peter,
somebody
played, and you know what I'm saying?
Maximilian maybe, but somebody.
Yeah. Anyway, so the point being is so I'm off topic, but the point is that sort of room personifies that whole journey. So that was my first takeaway.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think we're going to have one that we're going to share, but I've kind of alluded to it a bit here. I think that leaning into your production realities or constraints or whatever is a great way to inspire creativity. I think if you're looking at, hey, I'd like to do a small budget horror game, and horror as a genre is actually this often in film as well. It's a pretty small budget world, and that's why there's a ton of horror movies on, pick your streaming service here. I mean, there's tons of them every year. And if you really lean into that and are aware of what that means, you can still do something pretty darn interesting, as we've talked about, and you have to make interesting trade-offs. You have to think about, well, how am I going to get the best bang for the buck that I've got? Probably sitting down with the producer and saying, well, we need, this much gameplay, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it leads to some excesses in this case. But for the most part, finding hey, we're going to reuse spaces. We're going to, but we're going to find a way to vary that, with a different character. Characters only take so long to build because we're, 2000 whatever. They're not, we find ways to differentiate, but that don't require something new, gigantically new all the time. It's not all that different from how some design stuff is very cyclical in some big AAA games today. But they have a lot fewer constraints, so they can actually just make it feel fresh kind of all the time. And so the fact that you're doing some very repetitive stuff maybe is hidden by that. Here they knew they were not going to have that, and they found ways to work within those constraints and still do something pretty interesting, and spend the variant stuff where they could do it. Tying into that, they found a way to do something that was kind of as scalable as they had time for in the Insanity effects, which I'm talking now just about sort of the production reality of that is like, oh, here's a way that you can get more out of a space with something that's pretty simple to do and doesn't have to tie in with the rest of the design. So it's kind of like, well, as many as we have time for to fit in, and it turns out it's quite a lot. So, I mean, you could just kind of imagine people banging those things out, a couple of animators or whatever, or whoever was required for the different ones, because they were all kinds of different effects. It's really just, oh, I had an idea, I can put it in, it can fit in wherever. It's kind of a great way to be able to add content. And that I think comes out of their constraints as well. So that's a thing for me that I think about a lot being on a small team now, is how do we leverage that team the best? We're not approaching it in quite the same way, but it's a real reality. So it's a takeaway for me.
Yeah, as far as games that do reuse in sort of economical ways, despite our criticisms, is still pretty successful at putting those new coats of paint. And like you said, they found a story that really works well with 4 locations, and it's, again, similar to the design, very tightly wound, to especially the magic design and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to, if that is a requirement, like you said, from a production reality perspective of something that you need to accomplish, this is a good blueprint to look at how to get pretty good successes out of it. So yeah. My second one, I guess, so did you hit Insanity there too? Or?
Well, that I was hitting them from a production reality, but yeah, they were the one that I expected we would share.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'll just
kind of both chime in about it.
Yeah, and I'll just do a mini one there. But I mean, because I think somewhat because of as a weird sort of reference from a Metal Gear Psycho Mantis perspective. The Insanity system is just, or experience, I'll say, is just such a cool addition to just game development canon. To be honest, it's something when people talk about, especially the GameCube, but just cosmic horror games, Eternal Darkness always tends to come up because, and almost the first thing that people talk about is the Insanity thing. Experiences. Hesitate to call the system, but it is attached to a meter, so that's interesting, and it relates to combat and all that stuff, unless you play the way that I played.
Right.
But it's just very novel, and like Brett said, there's a lot of advantages for keeping things interesting and fresh as you're playing. But in Psycho Mantis's case, it was a couple moments, right, and some very clever uses of those moments, but this is, what do you say, like 150
some crazy number like that.
And it's very, very feasible, especially if you play sort of the way, quote unquote, it's meant to be played. It's very possible you're going to see a fraction of those, and you'll never see all of them. And so when it comes to that sort of, we talk about the water cooler talk often, especially in this era when there wasn't a lot online. I remember coming in the next day after playing and talking to, all of us talking to each other about what insanity effects we got.
Yeah.
And that's a cool sort of social experiment as well for players. I hesitate to call it revolutionary, but it just, as far as novelty's sake, it's one of the highest on the list for me in pretty much any game, because they just went so full on with it. And the reason I brought Psycho Mantis up specifically is a lot of them break the fourth wall. They're not even related just to Alex's experiences or the character's experiences. Rather, sometimes it's just the game crashes, or
right.
Your controller
deletes all your saves, and
I mean, it's just
I had a apparent broken piece of glass in my screen, like a bullet hole appeared or something like that. Yeah.
Flies on the screen, we got that. We had that great email that someone wrote in about the snake, which was not an insanity effect apparently. But anyway, that's my second one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd echo all of that. I would also say that, we call it water cooler talk, but it's also just a form of, I don't know, before we really called it this, kind of a viral marketing. It's like, when you hear somebody talking about this weird thing that happened and somebody else says, oh, I didn't get that one, I got this other weird thing that happened, that is immediately a curiosity of like, oh, I mean, you often see that today in procedurally generated games, right? If they have a fair amount of variance in how they pull things in, like it's not very common with the early procedural stuff, like we played Diablo, for example, and there's not a ton of water cooler talk around how that stuff goes, because there's kind of fairly little of it, or it's kind of I don't know, it doesn't generate a lot of surprise. But in this case, the surprise is built in, right? I mean, and I think that's what becomes the sort of marketing hook for spreading this by word of mouth, which when you don't have a ton of budget, you probably don't have a ton of marketing budget either, and having a hook like this to kind of get the word out is a huge help. I kind of wonder if something like this had come along a bit later in the age of the internet, if it might have just had longer legs without having to produce discs, right, to some marketing spec, based on buyers at Walmart or whatever. I wonder if it had been released today, or in the last, 5-10 years, if it might have actually had a lot more longevity and been played by a lot more people. Just by virtue.
Overall.
Yeah.
Oh, what I thought you were going to say is actually the opposite, in that the Insanity system today may not have actually had as big of an impact because...
No, I don't think it necessarily would have, but I think it might have benefited the game. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because all of, you can go out and watch all of the different effects and
right.
not be surprised by them, when you play.
Yeah.
But that's, in this day and age, that's up to the player. That's a choice to spoil that stuff for you. The other thing that to mention about it that that I forgot to mention is that you kind of reminded me of is there's an interesting positive tension with the way that it works too, in that it's a cool enough novelty that you want to experience these things, but it is in conflict with a resource in the game. And so that's obviously why I played with my sanity empty, because I kind of wanted to see how many of them I could get, and what it's like to play the game insane the whole time. But it obviously creates this tension of difficulty for doing it that way. So so it sort of makes this little moment, this little choice moment of, am I going to finish this enemy when it's down or not, right? And putting that in the player's hands is very cool, because you don't have to finish the enemies.
Yeah, it's also right. It's a naturally difficulty modifier, right? That just comes out of gameplay.
Yeah,
you're gonna push your luck, right?
Yeah, and it's having difficulty related to an experience, like these little mini vignettes, is very interesting, because that doesn't happen very often. As a side note, it was very interesting to me too that during Alex's sections for most of the game, you don't have enemies to kill until the end, and so other than using recover, I guess you don't have that opportunity. So she is there's a metaphor there of her basically through the systems, she's slowly going insane, and not able to really recover it.
Yeah, good point. One other thing I guess I would point to in the game. It's gone now. I just had it, and now it just slipped away. Oh, well, I guess maybe it'll come back. Sorry. I was like,
okay.
and I just...
You mean takeaway wise, or?
Yeah, I had another one that was right there, and I can jump I got to thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, one that I think both of us would share too is the magic system. I think the polarity relationship, for lack of a better term, between the damage or the sort of magic types. I've mentioned before the sort of elegance of the rune system itself, both in creating the sentences, but also in the casting and the time. So the risk reward of the more powerful spell means the more runes, means the longer cast time. And all of that is very visually represented and experientially represented in the game. So it's not like a menu-driven system that's like hidden. You're not making the spell in the menu and then just casting it instantly. You actually make it in the menu, and then you see it being cast, right? And there's even voice related to the runes. So, when you're playing a lot, you probably even memorize what the rune names are when they say them. So you kind of can chant it along with them. Some of the
Pargon.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Well, we'll never forget Pargon. So it just, I keep saying this sort of tightly wound design, but it's just I just love how that system all fits together, and like I said, one of the reason I asked you which spells you use is, I think to finish this game, you really don't need to use a lot of the spells. So it's very much on the player to fool around with those things. And if I were to play again, I definitely would, dabble in some other ones. And then learning, as the characters and Alex are learning them, the system is growing over time, which I thought was cool too, as you're finding these pieces of things throughout the game. And then she becomes the most powerful because she has all the information.
So. From all these different, and that actually ties in with mine, which my one that I had forgotten has come back. I really appreciate the degree to which this spreads across time and cultures. Like you have characters of both genders, multiple races, and of course from different time periods. And I think that's unusual at this time. It's still unusual today to some degree. So it's actually kind of nice. I mean, it's less unusual now, I think, than it was even 5 years ago, but it's still not commonplace necessarily. So yeah, it's really kind of great to have to play, Kareem and I guess her name's Elia and Roberto, and I mean just kind of all over the place. Mike,
yeah.
All these different characters, and I think that's really it's reinforced at the end too that it takes this diversity of people to defeat the big evil. So I do really appreciate that. Clearly different religions, although it's not really spoken of. It's pretty implicit in some of the character choices as well. So yeah, there's just kind of a lot going on in that, and that's pretty great.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you were to imagine them being unsuccessful with that diversity for this game, when Alex at the end talked about how humanity banded together to fight Pious and the ancients, and they were all a bunch of white folks.
Yeah. That'd be a little more flat.
It wouldn't, so it's like, it's well thought through for them to have the wherewithal to say, well, if this is a global threat, if this really is humanity, then you have to represent it that way. So in 2002, that's definitely some foresight.
Yep, for sure. Any other final thoughts?
No, those are mine. I think we got all the good ones. Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, well, that's Eternal Darkness in the book, as it were, in the tome.
Closing the book on
Eternal Darkness. Just as the game ends, closing the cover. So we're going to turn to feedback now. We just have one email we're going to read this week. I did want to say, and I had made a note to myself a couple weeks ago when we had maybe an episode where we did a lot of feedback or something. I wanted to particularly call out how much feedback enriches the podcast, because it is meant to be a book club style discussion, a critical and personal response, and having more information and thoughts from the audience really makes us feel that sort of book club feeling. So we really appreciate all those who write in or come and join me on the stream or send us something on Twitter or what have you. It's just it helps us feel part of a community that's having this discussion around a game. So we really do appreciate it, and I want to say keep them coming, because we don't always play up that it's like a book club for games. And it is not just our voices that are important in that. So I just wanted to I was reflecting on that a little while ago, and I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah, that's well said. No, it is true that we do forget about that sometimes, but it is, and we trust us. We know how hard it is to play games this quickly, this much. But I do really hope some people do try to play along with us book club style. So you kind of and stop where we stop, and so you can kind of be a part of that conversation real time. So. Yeah, please give us your thoughts, like Brett said, when you do come upon that, as much as you can. Even something short and sweet is fine too.
Absolutely. Well, I have given you another name that I'm not going to try as the email this week. Yep. Yeah. Sorry, man.
Okay. Oh, man. Okay. All right, here we go. The subject is a question about sigil from Dejan Josefovich. Josefovich. Yes. Nope. Butchered it.
Sorry.
No. Yep. Tell us, write in and give us the what for.
Send an MP3.
I should have looked it up ahead of time.
Well,
apologize, Dejan. Yeah. Hi, Brett and Tim. Huge fan here. Love the show. I just caught up on all the Doom episodes and have a question about Sigil. What do you guys think about lighting in Sigil? I approached you already on Twitter. Oh, that's right. And Brett suggested the email is a better medium for the answer. I do recall that. For me, lighting in Sigil is a love-hate relationship. I love it because it does so much to bring the correct mood and feeling to the levels. And I hate it because I often found myself in pitch black areas not knowing where I am. Brett suggested that this is maybe due to the gzDoom setup, which I also use, but whatever I tried, I couldn't get it to be better. So what are your opinions on the subject? Also, can you shed some light on how is the concept of lighting approached when designing a game and or game level? Oh, that's a biggie. Looking forward to the new episode. Best regards, John.
Yeah, so I kind of gave my brief thoughts on that, and we did touch a little bit on it. I also found myself sometimes confused. There was only one that was really dire for me, where I just like could not see enough of the environment. And I also played with gzDoom settings, which, you know, having just played Doom with the original renderer, I can see the differences. Like in the lighting model felt crisper to me in the original, like you could see better when you were meant to. So there was definitely some difference. I tried to fiddle with it, got nowhere fast, and made it much worse, and just reverted to the regular settings. So I echo that. I only had the one spot where I was like, ooh, I got really lost in this area because there's not enough lighting. For all I know, he'll do another update and be like, oh yeah, there should be a light here or whatever, to shine the way for the player. But yeah, how about you?
I don't, to be honest, when I saw the question over Twitter, I don't recall having any issues myself. I remember dark areas, but I think my memory is that I felt like it complemented what the level design was doing at the time. Like it wanted me to feel panic, you know, and with some good, interesting sort of enemy spawning and placement. You know, I would hear an enemy when I was in the dark or something like that, or they were coming out of the dark, and, you know, I would panic and freak out and run away or whatever. And so I don't remember being frustrated though by it, to sum up. There is a chance that I might have done something with my laptop to just punch up the gamma or something that might have not even been through gzDoom. So maybe I don't recall if I fulfilled with that or not. I definitely didn't fool with the gzDoom setup, but I could have done something with my monitor. So
yeah.
But to his
my lighting environment also is not ideal, where I play games for the podcast. If I stream them in particular, I've got like a light that kind of shines down basically on my monitor and my TV, which makes it even worse. When I've been playing horror games, I've been dimming the lights, and it's actually much better. That I can actually see the screens a lot better. I don't notice it when I work because it's, you know, the environment's very different for that. But yeah, I do notice like, oh yeah, it's probably partly that. Maybe I'll just dim the lights more often when I play, because maybe it would have read better. So I can for sure. When I played Sigil, I think it was almost it was very dark in the room that I played. Yep. And it was great that way. Yeah. To talk about his final question though, there, which is, to be honest, quite a biggie. Yeah.
When it comes to his pun of shedding some light on how the concept of lighting approached when designing a game or a game level. I mean, the thing that I will say that's probably very obvious, because it's hard to really sum up, like there's a whole course on just this question that you could have. But being my theater in my background, you know, lighting is a whole discipline in and of itself. And these days in game development, it is that way on big teams as well. The teams that I've worked with, there's whole lighting departments that's all they do. The one thing I will say from a game level design perspective and a game design perspective is lighting. On the podcast, I tend to talk a lot about, both of us talk a lot about level design specifically, especially in the era of games that we've been playing, because level design plays a really important role when you have lower fidelity. It's kind of one of the main ways to communicate to the player when you have lower fidelity. But when I talk about level design, I am, and I should have said this a long ago, I am including lighting in that, and lighting itself is an integral part of actually successful level design. So when I'm talking about level design, and I think even in Sigil's case, I talked about some of the macro flow of some of John's levels that were really great, and some of the backtracking and sort of shortcutting that he did was great. But that stuff isn't successful without lighting. It's not just the top-down map flow. Don't be misled that, oh, if I'm a level designer, I'm just figuring out what the map feels like and looks like and what's the shape. You have to think about lighting as well, because the lighting is critical for giving player direction and tells where to send them, where not to send them, mood, as we talked about in this with the dark areas, etc. Right. And so drama. Every single room, every single sight line, lighting has to be a part of it. So you need pillars for the game from a lighting perspective, what your goals are. And then you need pillars for each level from a lighting perspective. So you kind of need to think about it at every layer of design. And so it's not just a matter of let's make this look pretty, or let's put some colored light here to make it kind of cool or whatever, or just whatever your art direction is. It's actually critical for every single sort of view that the player has. Anyway, that's very broad.
That's a whole deep topic. I mean, I'm not a level designer by trade, nor inclination. So I tend to just use that sometimes in my feedback as like, I like light as just another tool to help you keep your bearings. If an area is lit ahead, then I know that's kind of the general direction I probably want to go, right? I mean, that's just kind of a natural thing. And so kind of interplaying between dark and light areas can really just kind of propel a player forward and be used as landmarking. I've definitely given feedback on levels, which is like I get lost in the space. I can't tell which way I'm supposed to exit after I've come in, and often the solution is like, oh, I can put a light there. It's just like, it's a very simple tool to be just like, oh, well, if I light this area, you'll know it's not the way you came in because it was dark when you came in, right? And you'll be oriented. So it's sometimes a very simple solution to a problem that might be otherwise quite hard to solve. So, yeah.
One quick thing that I thought of while you were talking that jogged my memory. An interesting thing that's happening in modern game development right now with lighting that is probably obvious when you think about it. That as we are marching toward, many games are always marching towards sort of the photorealism goal through various means. Ray tracing being sort of one of the most recent sort of exciting things that people are talking about. Both photorealism and high fidelity assets and worlds. The thing that is starting to become attention for design and art is that photorealism challenge. And so the example that I'll give there is, if there isn't a light source for where this light is coming from, then it doesn't make sense because it's not real. Right. But the thing you have to remember is that you're still making a game where somebody, as Brett said, needs to be guided through the game. And I'm not talking about just linear games. It can be any world structure. And so there has to be a balance between what is quote unquote real and what is design, what is a game. Because you still have a usability challenge there where a player needs to be able to navigate. And I think we mentioned it on this, in this series somewhere, it's ringing a bell where, before you know it, you're moving through a space and you didn't really have to think too hard about how you got through it. Actually, no, it's actually on a different podcast that we were talking about that. And that's good level design, right? Where you don't have to think about it. And that's good lighting design for the level design. And so if you're just going for photorealism, what is real for a given room does not mean that it's going to make it good for a game. So there's got to be a good balance there, even if you're going for, Call of Duty Modern Warfare realism.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's a big topic like cameras and design or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
It's another one of those big big issues.
He put a smiley face, so he must have known.
Yeah,
that.
he did. Yeah. Oh yeah, he knew. And he knew he was dropping that pun there too. Besides, so yeah, thank you for your your question. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's good. It's good actually to have a tie-in with Sigil there at the end. We had teased a while back that we were going to have an interview for the Doom series, and we're lucky enough that we're going to have John Romero on next week. Due to scheduling, it is going to mean, however, that we're going to be a day late with the next episode. It'll come out on Thursday instead of Wednesday because we'll be recording Wednesday late enough in the day that it's gonna kind of be in the middle of my day, and I'm not going to be able to finish all the post-production before it needs to go out. So it'll come out on Thursday, probably bright and early, and but we're really looking forward to that conversation. I know you in particular, sir, are just like chomping at that level designer bit. Yeah,
can't wait. It's crazy.
And we will announce. I guess we'll probably talk about our next game between now and then. We've kicked some stuff around, and we'll come up with that. We're not gonna tease that just yet. So you'll have to wait another week to hear what to pick up next. But yeah, I guess that's it for us tonight. You can find the podcast on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And, of course, I've been streaming games at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. I've been playing horror games throughout the month. I finished up the Alan Wake stuff and moved on to Dead Space 2, which has been a lot of fun. And, boy, that's got some horrifying stuff in it, as well as whatever we're playing. So thanks. Feel free to come join me on that. Have fun playing games this week, and good night.
Good night.